All right, here we are for our third Thursday training in October, and we have the joy of welcoming Colleen Earp, who is the program director for Massanetta Springs Camp and Conference Center in Massanutten, Virginia. And so she's going to be part of a conversation around youth, young adult, children's ministries, and it will go where it will go. So who knows? There may be nuggets beyond those things. You'll have to tune in to find out. But before we get started, let's open with prayer. Oh, loving God, you call people at all stages of life. We baptize infants knowing that you claim them in those waters. You seal them with your spirit, that they are precious in your sight. And as toddlers and children growing up, as tweens and teens and young adults and into our adult years, every age, every person is precious in your sight. As life has changed so much for all of us, but in some ways, especially for our children, youth, and young adults, help us help us open our ears to how our churches need to change too. What Christian formation looks like in this time and place, what gathering can be like for people growing up in this era. Guide our conversation. May we be open to your spirit of creativity and possibility, and may we ask questions that are full of wonder, because it's wonder that we especially love in the young people around us. So guide this time, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Newcastle Presbytery, for having me, even if some of you are checking this out later. Like Cindy said, I'm the program director at Massanetta Springs, which is basically a professional hype woman for leaders in ministry. I love it. I have the coolest job in the Presbyterian Church, I think. It's my job is to find leaders for things, to celebrate people's unique gifts and callings in all kinds of different settings. My job is to support other leaders by offering rest and resources and other kinds of encouragement. And my job is to raise up new leaders, like our young people, through middle school conference and other leadership opportunities for our youth. I get to just learn and play with cool people. That's my job, and it is an honor and a joy and a privilege to be an adult that other people can send their kids to. That I can be that cheerleader and support in other ways. I know how much that meant to me growing up, and so I love that this is my calling. So I know we talked a little bit about who's in the room. I do hope this can be a little bit of a dialogue today, but if anybody sees this later and has questions, I'm happy to talk, and easy enough to find online at Massanetta Springs or by calling us down here. But I wanted to share a little bit of my experience in youth ministry, some of the places and contexts I've served in, to kind of frame. I came up with a list of some of my greater challenges in this work and some of my greater triumphs. And I don't claim to have all the answers by any stretch of the imagination, but I do strive to be as flexible and creative as possible in working together to find the solutions that we can find. So I grew up Presbyterian. I grew up in an enormous Presbyterian church in New Jersey that had a big enough youth program that we didn't have to do anything with anyone else. We always had enough people to do our own retreats, do our own trips, which was really special. And also, I didn't know until I was an adult that there is a whole Presbyterian church out there, that we are not alone. And that has been a really powerful thing for me. I grew up to become a leader in that youth group. For a while, I worked with the middle school kids in my home church for a number of years while figuring out what I should be when I grow up. And the Holy Spirit kept telling me over and over I should be a camp director. So I was in and out of camp and conference ministry, starting at age 16 with a leadership training program, a kind of counselor training program at Johnsonburg, which I think is your closest Presbyterian summer camp, one that I highly recommend to you all. And I've been on summer staffs and year-round staff since I was 17 years old, which, believe it or not, is more than half my life ago. I served at Johnsonburg. I served at Feliciana in South Louisiana. I served at Camp Hanover just outside of Richmond, which is another place kind of close to you all that I'd highly recommend for their overnight camp programs in the summer. And I've been at Massanetta Springs for just over a year now as program director. And I work with programs for all ages, but definitely my heart is in youth ministry. In the midst of all of that, I did a stint in pediatric chaplaincy at a trauma center. So I have some very different experience working with kids and youth and young adults and their families, very far removed from what is normal. And I liked to joke all the time that being a hospital chaplain is just like being a camp director. You're meeting people in a weird place and walking with them for a little while and trying to figure out what to do with that together. But there is a shred of truth in that. And I think that that's true for wherever we get to interact with children and youth and young adults. I served as a young adult volunteer in New Orleans. So I have that connection as well. I have experience outside of the church. I taught as adjunct faculty at my alma mater and some other colleges. And that's more young adults than youth, but still part of that formation process for sure. And I still get some of that in hiring and training and leading a staff of young adults in the summer as well. So I feel like for my age in particular, I have a lot of different kinds of experience, and that has led me to this list of challenges and this list of triumphs in no particular order. But I want to pause for a second if there are any questions so far.
I'm just amazed at everything that you do. And then I'm envious because you're living my life.
Oh, it's so much fun. I am so lucky. As much as I harp on the Holy Spirit for being a difficult presence in my life sometimes, continues to do things I don't expect. I have ended up right where I am supposed to be, and I'm so grateful.
When people are with me and they see everything that I do and everything that I'm connected with, I'm like, I just do where God pushes me, and hopefully one day I'll figure it all out and I'll have one path.
Yes.
I just can't question it anymore, but it's wonderful.
It really is. It really is.
And just,
and so God keeps nudging us into this work with children and youth and young adults, right? Like, we're not supposed to forget about them. We're supposed to be including them in the church, but it is such hard work. And anybody who is watching this knows that this is really hard work, doing ministry with young people for 1,000 different reasons. So some of my less impressive moments I wanted to start with. One of those less impressive moments, I don't think was so much about myself, but was just the context that I'd come up in. When I first transitioned from being a youth, and then I went away to college, and then I moved back to my hometown for a while. And that's when I started volunteering with my youth group. And the church was really happy to have young adults volunteering to do stuff. But they did not actually want to treat us as adults. They still saw me as the 7th grader with pigtails going on the mission trip in the summer. They still saw me as the goofy kid who went to summer camp and came back wearing nothing but tie-dye for the next year. So that was a really hard adjustment. And that's more a cautionary tale, I think, to folks who might see people growing up in their midst, is once you've welcomed them to be adults, you need to really remember that they are adults, because they're not going to stick around if you continue to treat them like children. I will not forget leading that youth group on a retreat one weekend, and I was 24 or 25 years old, so young, but certainly old enough to drive the church van, and I had several other 25-year-olds with me. And one of the parents came and dropped off his kid and said, "So is your mom going on this trip with you?"
Oh,
thinking like my mom was the real grown-up going, and she wasn't. She didn't volunteer with the youth group. She did other things in the church. And just how much it stung to not be taken seriously as an adult. And I get it. These people really had seen me since before I could walk. But to remember that they really are adults when they get to adulthood. Other challenges I have experienced along the way with myself, just learning to do better and watching other leaders around me. One is not listening to the things that the young people care about. I do not care about Justin Bieber, but my youth group kids really cared about Justin Bieber. And as much as I really couldn't relate to them, really wasn't interested in their fashion or the slang that never in 1,000 years can I keep up with, they were revealing something of themselves in these conversations. And beneath those things that they love, they care very deeply about other things too. And if we take the time to listen to the celebrations of the Justin Biebers, or I'm sure they've moved on to 1,000 pop stars since then, this is now dating my own self, they really do pay attention to the world around them and care about deep things. And so if we take the time to listen to them going on and on about their favorite boy band or whatever is popular at the moment, we get to those deeper things. So remembering to really listen, even to the things that you cannot relate to or care about, but by celebrating these things, we get a chance to dig a little bit deeper and celebrate some really deep and important things that they're caring about in the world. And that leads me to a challenge in honoring their identities, which can be really hard because it feels like they're changing all the time as we get better language for things, as we get more accustomed to people having all kinds of colorful hair and style. It might seem like it's changing constantly, and why should I bother to learn these pronouns or this particular fashion statement because they're just going to change it next week. And that might be so, because young people are figuring out who they are. And we had those things too. I know I had those things as a teenager. I did not dye my hair, but I definitely wore some really strange clothing choices as I was figuring out what felt comfortable, what felt true. And they're doing the same thing. They just have way better language for it than we did as teenagers. So being patient and honoring these identities as they're coming to the surface is really important. And doing your best to roll with it as they change. Matching their energy when they present you with new information. If they share something of their identity with us and it's kind of quiet and nervous, meet them quietly and welcome them where they are. And if they are loud and proud of whatever it is, celebrate that. Because even if it's something uncomfortable for us, it goes a long way for them to know that, okay, I'm safe here and I'm being heard. And even if the adult in question is not perfect about it yet, we can figure it out together. And that's going to keep people safe in their lives, but also in our churches. And that's something we're always growing in, right? Another thing I added to my list of challenges is not seeing models of the faith. I'm really, really proud that today in Virginia was a Board of Ed hearing about some new policies that aren't particularly inclusive of all children's gender identities. So particularly trans kids are not well included in these child safety policies presented at the state level. And it made the news this afternoon. I'm very proud of not one, but two people I know who are Presbyterians in the Richmond area who went and spoke and encouraged people to be more thoughtful than this and to include all of God's children and keep all of God's children safe, that there's so much we don't know. And that there's so much we need to honor in God's creation that's diverse and beautiful. I don't remember anybody in my church growing up who I know went to protests or these kinds of public hearings or anywhere out in the world, pride events or parades or public forums. I didn't know this was happening. And I'm sure it was. I grew up with some really wonderful role models, and I just didn't know about that. But I think that public presence, being able to advocate and name our faith in those kinds of public witness ways is really important for our young people to see. A frustration I hear over and over and over is that our faith is just, we sit in a church on Sunday, we sing some old songs, we say some prayers, we hear a sermon, and that's it. our young people care so deeply about the world around them, and they want to get up. They are getting up. They are leading change in our world. And if they don't see us alongside them, or even in front of them or behind them on these issues, that faith is not relevant. So actually taking action, which can be really hard and scary, but finding people to do that with, and learning how to do that safely, be out in the world representing the faith and modeling what it really means to follow Jesus in these ways, I think is a really important thing, and a thing that we can be better at. I actually found out last night, somebody had recommended a prayer book to me, and the last name was the same last name as the pastor at that church when I was a baby. Someone who I don't remember particularly well, but I was trying to see if there was a connection, and it turned out there wasn't. But when I Googled that name, I found out that the pastor, when I was a baby, had taken quite a public stand on some environmental justice issues in my hometown when I was a baby. And that floored me. I had no idea. And I was a toddler at the time. But to know that really gave me some reassurance in my upbringing in the faith. And I wonder what it would have been like to be able to talk to him about this and join him in that work, had I known about it. So being that kind of a role model, and joining in that work together. The last thing on my list of grievances is the very real and deeply personal feeling of frustration when no one shows up. It is hard. It is so hard to plan events and then no one can come. No one can come. Nobody does come for whatever reason. There's so many different things on young people's schedules: sports and arts and school and even just rest. And those are important and valuable things too. And it's hard not to take it personally when people choose those over the things that we very carefully try to curate for them. And I would just encourage folks not to take it personally, because it so rarely is. It really is just a bonkers sports schedule or academic schedule a lot of the time. So continuing to be flexible with scheduling, finding where you can meet them, when you can meet them, where they are. But remembering that it's not us, and to keep showing up, and to work on our own patience about these things so that we can continue to be present and can continue to offer these things. Because if we give up on offering the things, they definitely won't show up.
Yeah.
So
Can
there's
I add one?
Yes, I was going to say that's my list of grievances. I'm curious what else this is bubbling up for us about, just what is hard about this kind of work.
Yeah, one of the places where I think we miss one another, and this is all generations, but any of the quick dismissals of the use of technology, when, and even for me, and I have not been a young adult for a while now, but when someone tells me you can't build community on Zoom, and that's a blanket statement, I'm like, you can.
Here we are.
You build a different community, use different tools, but by shutting it down, then that feels like a denial of my experiences. And I often hear the complaints, well, that's just because they're on their phones all the time, or they'll never return a call, they don't read their emails, all those kinds of places where we don't take an opportunity to understand, and our statements and sometimes even our questions are accusatory, dismissive, and make assumptions about what is and is not happening.
This reminds me of, there was a very prominent photo going around social media a few years ago of a bunch of kids in a famous art museum surrounded by incredible works, and they're all looking at their phones, and everybody's like, oh, the youth of today are trash. What a bunch of monsters, just ignoring all that stuff around them. The real story going on in that picture is they were on a class trip and they were looking up information about the artist and the style of art and how it was done. And they were making those connections of, oh, this is how this painting was done, or this was the context that this was built in. And right, so much broader an experience than we would have had, than even I would have had. We didn't have smartphones when I was going on school trips.
Yeah.
And certainly not before my time going on school trips. So yeah, we forget to appreciate that there's more to that story, and it can be an opportunity for connection. I think that's a wonderful example, Cindy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other things that strike you as grievances or challenges?
Our challenge is getting them into the church.
Yeah.
We don't have any. We only have two children by one family, and then one by another family, but he doesn't come that often. And the the teens, I call them, once they got to where they could speak their mind, they don't come to church anymore.
Yeah. And there's so many possibilities of what that disconnect is, because teenagers speaking their mind is a glorious thing. They have important things to say.
Yeah.
And if they feel like that flies in the face of their upbringing or the people in the church, or that those thoughts and experiences aren't welcome, well, of course they don't want to be there. And that's not to say your congregation isn't welcoming of that. That's just one possible layer to it, right? There's the possibility that just their school schedule keeps them away. There's so many things, right?
Yeah, I've heard, well, their friends don't go to church. They don't want to be, out of the group. That, and one that really struck me, and I could see what she was saying, was she said, well, people in your church, who's speaking to a parent, said are just older people that just want to sit there and sing songs. And at first I was like, oh, and then I went, she's right. We want them to come to church, but we don't give them anything, we don't give them a reason.
And I think there's something lovely and important about sitting together on a Sunday morning and singing our songs and praying our prayers, right? Like that worship centers us. And maybe people who are younger than us are looking for more than that. And finding ways to connect all of those pieces is hard. Is so hard. I never promised I had all the answers, so.
And I do think some of it is discerning what is the mission and ministry of a particular congregation. Not every congregation, I believe, is called to have an active children's, youth, young adult ministry. That is something we that's one of those assumptions we place on our congregations, but that may not be your calling. Your calling may be to minister to an older population who still needs Jesus, or to be, working alongside, people in mid-career time, because those are your neighbors. The funniest stories I ever heard about this were the intentional retirement communities, where the entire community, like Sun City, is built for 55 plus. Like, you can't live there if you are below a certain age. And the church, they're saying, why don't we have any, we need to get some kids then. It's like, but that's not your mission. I mean, unless you want to do some grandparent stuff, it's not your mission.
Yeah.
That's not your calling in that place. And it's okay that that's not your calling.
I think so. And what are adults but just grown-up children of God, right? We are all still children. So there are still so many opportunities there, but you're absolutely right, Cindy. Oh, that's hilarious.
Come on.
Oh, well, I'd love to offer some of the places where I've seen some exciting things happen, and you can glean whatever you can from these. I'm sort of taking notes, and I will send to you after this, Cindy, a list of some resources that I have found meaningful lately, some different articles, some different leaders who might be sources of wisdom in any of this mayhem, for whatever it's worth. So I might mention a few of those along the way. So here's some of the really exciting, cool things that I have seen happen in youth ministry. finding connection, right? Finding these spaces even where we can just lament together that this is so hard. This is really exhausting work, and we don't all have perfect solutions to it. And we don't even all have teenagers in our midst to try to have solutions to it. But finding those connections, and sometimes that's on Zoom, right? Using the technology and the gifts we have in that way. But finding those connections and spaces to grieve how hard this work is, but also to remember how important it is that we do still very much care about all ages of God's children. In my work, I was in the Presbytery of the James on the staff for 7 years doing specifically youth ministry. And every winter I would host a lunch at the Presbytery office, free lunch. I would just make soup and bread, really simple, and invite anybody who works with youth or wanted to work with youth to come together. And those often turned into sessions of just grieving all the things that were hard about youth ministry. But I think there was something very rich about that one, we could hear we aren't alone in this work. But two, as these challenges start to bubble up, it could make me, as sort of a regional coordinator of youth ministry, more aware of what people are actually facing and figure out ways to be more supportive of each other. And inevitably at those lunches, fun ideas would bubble up for different kinds of youth events, different youth retreats, or we started hosting a monthly youth day at our local camp. That was just a free event. We invited youth groups of any size to just come out and play. It was a recreation day. And it took a little bit of pressure off our youth leaders that they didn't have to plan one Sunday a month. And it also gave the youth a chance to see, oh, okay, so maybe my friends at school don't go to church, but there are other people my age who go to church. So finding those connections, especially, we as Presbyterians are so connectional. So really leaning into that bigger family to look for company and comfort along the way. One of my very favorite things I have done in regional youth ministry in the last number of years was teach high school students polity. I know it sounds bananas, but I found somebody who didn't take himself too seriously, who was just ready to kind of jump in there with the teenagers and walk them through, what does a session meeting look like? What are the power structures in our denomination? How do Robert's rules work? And what that language is and how that power can be used. We practiced, this is actually how I learned polity in seminary. We practiced by ordering a pizza together. And so we had to use Robert's rules to walk through getting group consensus of what kind of pizza we were going to order. The youth council took this lesson and they showed up at the next presbytery meeting and got an overture passed. Once they know, they're not stupid. Once they know and they're encouraged and they're supported, they can do things like this and they can be connected and they're really excited to step up and be heard. So I still just think about this and smile. I think about the Yad who went to General Assembly this last time, who was on that youth council and was like, I don't understand why every other Yad doesn't know that much about polity yet. Which also isn't true, but that she went in really confident that she could understand the system and work within it for changing for good. So trusting our young people with that power and walking with them and working with them so they can really understand what that power is and how to use it and how to use that language. So that's a really dorky example of what to do with teenagers, but one that I am really excited about. And we'll repeat that lesson. We have a high school retreat in a few weeks, and one of our workshops is going to be led by a presbytery leader and teaching these are the power structures of the church and how you can get involved in them.
If you ever need somebody, that sounds like fun.
Oh, you are next on my list. It's so fun. It's so fun. Something I like to think I was a little bit aware of, but really came and presented itself to me very clearly this summer is our young people are a lot more self-aware than I think we are willing to give them credit sometimes. And I don't say that we should just, let them run with whatever they say they're thinking and feeling and leave it completely unchecked. The example I'm thinking about is we have these high school leaders for our middle school conferences, and they were very upset one day about bedtime in particular. They thought we were asking them to go to bed too early. We were being way too strict with the curfew. And we had a long conversation about what it means to take responsibility for yourself, that they had a job at this conference that they needed to do. And I think that resonated really well. But what I heard in that conversation that I didn't expect was this awareness that some of them are night people and some of them are morning people and want to put themselves to bed even earlier than I would go to sleep at night. We have been telling them for years to pay attention to their feelings, to learn these things about themselves, to be more self-aware. We have movies like Inside Out, which is like a decade old now, but we have been feeding them this information forever. We've been telling them to take care of themselves. They hear us, and they're doing a better job than many adults. So to listen to their sense of self, to listen to their sense of identity, and to find ways to honor that are meaningful. In our case, that did not mean letting them stay up all night, because they did have to be a support to the conference. They did have to be leaders for our middle school kids. But on their day off, yeah, we could be a little bit more loosey-goosey with the curfew, because they didn't have to be up first thing the next morning. So figuring out how to meet in the middle on these things, but really listening to them, because I think they know, because they've been listening to us, as it turns out. Yeah. So that was a big learning moment for me this summer. Another thing I'm celebrating right now is this new youth retreat that Massanetta has. In a couple of weeks, we are going to welcome over 150 people to a brand new retreat called Keep Awake. It's our first ever Matthew 25 event, and it is specifically for high school students. This has been designed centered on worship. It has been designed centered on leadership skills. So that's that polity class. That's where that's happening. And we've got some other great leadership skills and advocacy skills happening, communication, and leadership training kind of things. And I can't think that a lot of the high school students maybe know all of those inner workings when they're signing up for it, but their leaders do. But I think we've hit on something for the right time. It's the right thing at the right time, that we have this vision as a denomination right now to eradicate systems of poverty and racism, to focus on congregational vitality, which means so many different things, right? That's not any one thing. So I think having this retreat in this moment and having something that points to the leadership skills in this moment, people are just really excited to come and like, great, somebody else can figure out what on earth we're supposed to do about these issues. Once again, I don't claim to have all the answers. I definitely don't, but I think people are eager for this. And in particular, I'm learning more and more that our young people are really eager to put things to action, to find ways to, well, if I'm going to be part of a church, like, what does that mean for me? Like, I need to do something with this. It can't just be something latent in the background. Because they're just so much more aware and they're so much more committed to that world around them. We called incredible leadership for this retreat. We have just gifted preacher and musicians and worship leaders. Our workshop leaders are coming from all over the place and have a lot of really incredible activist skills and leadership gifts. So we've got this awesome team of people ready to model this for our young people. I don't think it'll be perfect. I don't think that every single high school student who's going to come to this is going to be like, great, sign me up to be Presbyterian forever. But what I do see happening is this is an event that has limited capacity because it's November in Virginia. We can't just be outside spilling over at the edges. But people are hungry for this. People are hungry for active faith. And meaningful faith and meaningful connection. So we got really lucky that we scheduled it at a great time with great people, and the people are coming. But I think that speaks to something much bigger, and that is that our young people care deeply about the world around them and want to make it better and want us to help them make it better. So I'm really excited about doing that with them. So I do have a couple of ideas about things that folks can do in their own congregations that might be meaningful for however many young people you have. If you have one, that is enough. And if you have more than one, many more than one, these are some really exciting things you can do as well. One of those things is to work on ourselves. And I say ourselves because I am included in this, that I need to work on my own patience and well-being so that I can have the stamina for this incredibly hard work. So I know what centers and restores me because this work is hard, but I hope that leaders in churches, that everyone in churches will find what centers them. So hopefully worship, maybe you're connected to a worshiping community, but maybe you take a yoga class regularly, maybe you join a book group, maybe you just go for a walk on a beautiful day, but keeping yourself well enough and strong enough to roll with the mayhem and the challenges that ministry to young people presents is really important. And drink some water, whatever your self-care practices are to center you for this work. Drink some water while you're at it. Something practical that can be done in the church is lifting up the young people as leaders. And there's so many ways to do this. There is no reason that you cannot have a young child reading scripture on a Sunday. There is no reason you cannot have a teenager leading a prayer. And even if it is deeply the tradition of a congregation that the pastor does all the things or that the elders need to do these things, there are so many ways that lay people can share in worship. When I was 12 years old, we had a church musical that I got nervous and didn't audition for and then had major regrets about. And the director heard that when I told her I was sad and I wanted to do something in this. And she heard that I had this loud, clear voice. And she said, "Why don't you introduce it?" And I read a paragraph that was written for me. And after the first one, she said, "Okay, you read it really fast." And I grew up in New Jersey, so that's on brand. But hey, next service, slow it down a little bit. You sound great. And I did it at the next service. And then I got invited to be part of our lay readers group for worship regularly. And once a month, 13-year-old Colleen was reading scripture in worship. And that was powerful to feel trusted with that. But also, not a big deal to just let the 13-year-old read the thing from the Bible. Reading is not everyone's gift, but there are certainly ways to include young people in worship regularly, not just Youth Sunday or the children's musical. Ordain them. You can ordain youth elders. It doesn't.
And deacons.
Right, and deacons, right? Ordain them. It hurts nothing, but then actually use them. Don't just kind of tokenize that. Have them serve in communion. Have them be part of session meetings. Have them do homebound visits and send them to presbytery as your commissioner or general assembly. They don't have to serve as YADs, the young adult advisory delegates. They can be commissioners. They're elders. So ordain them and then listen to them and use them and trust them and work with them in that. Ordained or not, you can take them all of these places. I remember in high school attending a presbytery meeting for the first time and sitting with my friends in the back, and our youth pastor kind of explained what was going on, and some of it made sense and some of it didn't. When I bring youth to presbytery meetings, I actually have a presbytery bingo game, and I will include that in my resources. It's not meant to be disruptive. It could be if you want it to be, but just as a way of kind of keeping eyes and ears on what's happening in the meeting and looking for some of these buzzwords. Why do they keep saying "so moved"? What is a second, and just being able to follow along in that way. It's okay to make it a game. This is how we learn, through play. Another suggestion is to train your leaders. And I think we do a better job of this than we did when I started in youth ministry. We had our child protection policy and we went through it and that was it. But there are a lot of other things that would help people work with young people better. Small group facilitation skills. Not everybody automatically has that. But that's an easy enough thing to do a trial run of together as the leaders of a youth program. Listening skills. Also not a thing that everybody automatically has. And I know I've had to practice that over the years. Diversity training. Oh, our young people are just so much better than us at this. And this is racial diversity and gender diversity and neurodiversity. Being aware of the language so that we can talk to them well about it and that we can be leaders for them in welcoming everybody. And then send your people to leadership-oriented things. We have a phenomenal program at Massanetta Springs, the Advocates Program. Our high school leaders for our middle school conferences. This program, 13% of all of the people who have ever come to Massanetta Springs as an advocate or under the old name, the Enablers, 13% of them have gone into professional ministry.
Oh, wow.
And right, that's not really the ends here. This is not the goal of the program, is to just get a bunch of pastors and Christian educators and other church workers. But there is something stark about that, isn't there? Because for 13% of them being pastors and educators and youth leaders in different ways, that's a whole, 87, 87, should have written down the numbers ahead of time. That's a whole 87% who are leading in other ways, who are teachers, who are doctors, who are lawyers, who are parents, who are social workers and volunteers and advocates and going on to just do awesome stuff. So that application will be live when our middle school conference registration opens at the beginning of November. And we'll make a splash on social media, but you can also always reach out to us. But if not that, other camp and conference centers have great leadership programs, or support them in doing things outside of the church that are leadership oriented. Lift them up in their scout troops, on their sports teams, in whatever it is that they're passionate about. Celebrate their leadership because they're ready. And we talk a lot about wanting these people to be the future of the church, but they're already here. So let's treat them like the now of the church and celebrate them where we are. So that's not a perfect answer to anything that is hard about this ministry, but that's some of what I have been so lucky to do. And I'm wondering what this is bubbling up for you all. I've been talking for a long time.
I just want to highlight a program that started up in Boston Presbytery before I left, that all I really did was say, sure, give it a try. But a woman in one of our churches really felt strongly about youth ministry and was in a church with few, if any, youth. And so she wanted to start a regional youth ministry, and serving the presbyteries of Boston and Northern New England, I was insistent it had to be both presbyteries. And travel between churches is prohibitive. Whether you're in Boston and therefore dealing with Massachusetts traffic, or you're in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont and dealing just with distance and moose. So the plan was always that it would be there would be an online component. And then the pandemic started. But we'd already done the groundwork, and so she did launch a regional weekly youth ministry that was open to any youth within a certain age range who wanted to come. It didn't matter where they were, on Zoom. And she researched games you can play on Zoom and ways you can use Zoom's features, and it took off. And so, in the height of the pandemic, when kids were going to school on Zoom and everyone was talking about Zoom fatigue, these youth were choosing to log into Zoom for an hour and a half, Sunday afternoon, evening, for youth group with youth from across 4 states. And that's continued. And they are currently doing a confirmation class on Zoom using the Matthew 25 curriculum for confirmation. It's open to anyone. So for the churches, there are a lot of little churches in our denomination. Just in general, there are a lot of little churches. And so the churches with one or two have this regional resource that they can draw on, and then those youth meet these other youth and are like, oh, I'm not alone. And so
Suddenly we're
it is
less
something that,
alone.
it's in the back of my head for Newcastle. Is there a desire, an interest, a hunger in that?
Mhm.
Um, but the other story I just want to tell really fast, the church I served in Massachusetts, was small and struggling when a woman joined, and she had a baby, and so that baby grew up in the church, and he, as a baby, was passed all around. Everybody held the baby. I never knew who was going to hold whose baby as I was preaching. Um, one Sunday, we also really encouraged kids to be free in the church. It was okay to run and yell and laugh loud. And we had rhythm instruments. So during the opening music that was more lively, they were invited to come up to the front pew and grab maracas and tambourines and little drums and make a joyful noise. And they would parade around the sanctuary, in the end led by this little boy. And one Sunday when he was still pretty little, just starting to walk, I preach on the floor, not in the pulpit, and he came walking down the center aisle. So I just picked him up and I kept preaching. And I finished the sermon holding this child on my hips, and my arms were sore the next day because I was not used to that. So he grew up in this place where he was loved on and encouraged. And he started, I don't even know how it started. He started joining me and the worship leaders in the choir for prayer before worship. Because we would pray right off the front of the sanctuary in a hallway. And he just started coming. And there were Sundays when he'd be playing with some of the other kids, and we'd be like, hey, we're going to pray now. And he would leave the game to come pray with us in the hallway. He was like 5 and 6. Um, and
But that kind of welcome had been modeled
yeah,
for him from
yeah,
the start in such
yeah.
meaningful
And he
ways.
knew he had a place there.
Mhm.
So when I announced that I was leaving, that God was calling me to something else, and his mom explained on the way home from church that Sunday, uh, he several beats passed, and he was 6 years old at that point, and he finally let out this big sigh. He went, fine, I'll be the pastor.
Oh my gosh.
And it was
He's
just
ready.
so precious.
Yeah.
And I said to the session, when she shared the story, I was like, you need to help encourage this. He needs to understand some boundaries. He can't be the pastor, clearly.
He's
But
a little training first,
he
but
don't quash that. Don't, lift him up. And the pastor who followed me ended up instituting that the months with the fifth Sundays were led by the kids. And
so
so
good.
every time there was a fifth Sunday, and there is a fifth Sunday because they continue it, it's led by little kids, sometimes getting a line at a time fed to them, and reading a prayer or a scripture passage or taking up the offering. I mean, we just were really active, and part of what happened was the church grew, and the kids would say to their parents, it's time to go to church, mommy. We need to go to church now.
Mhm.
And if another quick story, one Sunday on the way to church, a mother had a flat tire, and her kids were in the back, and they had a meltdown because they weren't going to make it to church. And I felt really bad for the mom, but I was like, we're doing this the right way. Some
Yeah,
people left because it was too noisy. I said, that's fine. This is what we're committed to. So,
sure. And maybe there's a solution and maybe there's not for the noisiness for folks who are harder of hearing, but to make space for a little bit of chaos, right? Like youth ministry is kind of just a glorified form of improv comedy that you have to yes and this stuff, and you have to follow the lead of the children because they're figuring out what the boundaries are, and they're figuring out where they're safe and loved, and they're also figuring out where they're trusted. And there's something so powerful about giving them the trust to, yeah, you can be in this space. No, this isn't just for adults. You can be here with us and say this prayer before the service. You can be here and you can say the prayer in the service. One church I've guest preached in, the pastor's son always comes up to lead the Lord's Prayer with his dad. I was there in his dad's place one Sunday. He was there with his mom. But dad's not there. Dad's at a conference and he still marched up. He was just like, oh, well, obviously this preacher person is going to let me do this also. Like just knew that because he had been trusted. And he's just a little ball of energy that brings so much joy to that congregation because they just trusted him a little bit to be part of that moment. And what a simple thing to do is to just lift each other up and trust each other.
Whatever age we are.
Yes.
So we are at the hour. There we are.
We did it.
Before we close, I want to say that when we post the video, we'll also post the resources that Colleen's going to send.
Great.
And on Saturday, January 21st, we are having a Presbytery Leadership Training Day, and there's going to be all kinds of topics. It's going to be on Zoom, so we don't have to worry about, treacherous roads in January. And because it's on Zoom, we can invite in lots of guests, and Colleen is going to be one of our guests.
Great.
And she's going to lead essentially a 3-hour block for youth and young adults, not for the leaders, but doing that leadership development. What is it like to be a leader in the church for youth, young adult group? And so Saturday, January 21st from 9 to about 1:30, 9 a.m. to about 1:30 on Zoom. So for the one or two, here's an opportunity to learn how to order a pizza using Robert's Rules of Order. I mean, that sounds like a great piece for that. But yeah, an opportunity to get some equipping to step into roles of leadership, whether invited or taken, because we allow nominations from the floor. That's a good thing to learn. The other thing I want to say is our next 3 third Thursday trainings are going to be looking at the amendments to the Book of Order that came out of the 225th General Assembly, because there's a lot of them. And so there's a complete rewrite of what is now the Rules of Discipline section, and it's a complete rewrite with a complete new title to be called Church Discipline. So one of those third Thursdays will be just the Rules of Discipline amendments. The form of government piece, the G section, I think has almost 20 amendments. So that might end up being broken up between 2 of our third Thursdays. And then there are some for the Directory for Worship and the Foundations of Presbyterian Polity. All of that in advance of and preparation for our special meeting in February, where we'll be voting on those amendments. So I'll send out that announcement as always, and what we're doing each time, but those will be the next 3. Yeah, so anyone who's commissioner to presbytery, or just interested in our polity, those will be good gatherings.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you.